afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming to the library today. It's been our pleasure to coordinate our special collections department with our local youth author, Jett, who recently published a book that features 920 oral interviews with veterans in Spring Hill, Tennessee. Like most historians, Benny also enjoys going to local cemeteries, not just at Halloween, and conducting research in Nashville up at the Tennessee State Library and Archives. He also enjoys finding living relatives to talk about family history. In a true entrepreneurial spirit, he has started his own genealogy and writing business, the Ancestor Detector, and that's the logo up there, where he helps everyone else uncover their local family histories. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Jett.
Okay. Thank you all for coming to my presentation about my book, Spring Hill, Tennessee Veterans. Before I tell you about the lives of a few of my veterans that are included in the book, I'd like to tell you the story about how this project got started. At the age of 6, during the 2016 presidential election, my curiosity led me to want to learn more about America's presidents. And after just a few days, I learned each president's name in order and backwards, from Washington to Trump to Washington. For about 4 years, I mainly focused on presidents in American history, until one day when I was 10, I made the fateful decision to watch a Abraham Lincoln documentary and heard a very familiar name mentioned. One of the men who helped John Wilkes Booth escape after assassinating President Lincoln was a name named William Stork, Jett. I couldn't stop wondering if we were related, so I got onto Ancestry.com and started researching, later to find out that yes, we are distant cousins, through a man named Peter the Immigrant. That relation to William Stork Jett started my love of genealogy. It all just snowballed from there. I later found out that I'm the 6th great-grandson of Anne Robertson Johnston Cockrell, the sister of James Robertson, the founder of Nashville. Anne's family eventually migrated down to the Murray County area, so I became a very frequent visitor of the Murray County Archives to research some of my family's history. In June of 2022, the Murray County Archives auctioned off some of their extra books, and by the end of the auctions, I ended up with over 1,000 books about local history. I had duplicates, triplicates, and whatever 4 triplicates are. But what better place to give those duplicates to than the Spring Hill Public Library? Some of you would probably say this library, but that's not the point. When my mom called the library asking if they wanted the books, the library director, Dana Giroux, saw my potential and invited me to be part of their local history group at the library. Since July of 2022, I've been helping the Spring Hill Public Library with multiple history projects, and even started my own blog about people of Spring Hill's history called The Ancestor Detector. For 3 years, I have helped compile another book about Spring Hill's history called Spring Hill, A Pictorial History. At one of our meetings, in January of 2024, someone in the group mentioned that, one, we were gathering way too many veterans to put in just one small little chapter of the book, and that Benny needs to stop finding veterans and bombarding their email with them. Dana Giroux then mentioned that maybe it would be a good idea to write a separate book about Spring Hill veterans after the pictorial book. Everyone then looked at me and I became part of the project. At first I thought this is going to be hard, and what if I can't find just a few veterans? But I looked past all my worries and started gathering veterans. This book was actually supposed to be part of a group project and done after the pictorial book, but I couldn't help myself and I started compiling anyway. My mom helped me create, a form like this, and we put on the bulletin board at the library for people to take. From the first time I shared the form to Facebook and other places, I was constantly getting people sending me messages with names and photos. I was finally able to print the book just a couple weeks after Veterans Day, which is a goal I set with my friend Naomi Derryberry before she passed away last July. The Veterans book means a lot to me in many ways. I have many great memories of compiling this book, like the times I would call Naomi to ask a quick question and end up having a 45-minute conversation, to picking up the flyers at the library, or the many times I would annoy Dana Giroux. Wait, I still do that. But anyway, I always enjoy compiling this book, and I hope you guys will enjoy learning about the veterans who are included in this book. Colonel Albert Russell was born on May 15th of 1775. On December 9th of 1776, Albert enlisted into the 12th Virginia Infantry of General George Washington's army. On May 20th, 1777, he was promoted from ensign to second lieutenant and sent out to bring recruits soon after. While in the 12th Virginia Infantry, Albert likely saw conflict in the battles of Brandywine and Germantown. But in December of 1777, the infantry went to Valley Forge for the winter, and Albert received a furlough. In 1778, Albert also likely saw conflict at the Battle of Monmouth along General George Washington. After the 12th Virginia Infantry was redesignated the 8th Virginia Infantry, and Albert was made adjutant of the regiment the following year, he was transferred to the 1st Virginia Infantry. He retired from the Army on January 1st of 1779. According to multiple sources, Albert retired at the rank of colonel, but no record supports that other than theories. Over 20 years later, in 1808, settlers arrived at a place in the newly founded state of Tennessee, where they started their own village. The village was established in 1809 and named Spring Hill after the spring that everybody got their water from on, you guessed it, a hill. According to Wikipedia, Albert was the first person to build a home on the land that became Spring Hill. His log cabin stood in the vicinity where Ferguson Hall is now on Main Street and was very close to the spring that the village was named after. During Albert's lifetime, he married 3 women, Anne Elsie, who passed away in 1793, and Anne Huey, who passed away in 1807, and Lockie Henderson, who outlived Albert. In those 3 marriages, he had at least 5 children. Albert passed away on July 27th of 1818 and is buried at Maple Hill Cemetery in Huntsville, Alabama. Captain Thomas Wells was born on May 1st of 1782 in Caswell County, North Carolina. After moving to Tennessee in September of 1814, Thomas received a captain's commission and formed a company. While the British were moving towards Mobile, Alabama, Thomas's company joined the rest of the 2nd Tennessee Mounted Militia at the Rendezvous in Fayetteville, Tennessee. From there, they made their way to Fort Jackson, then to Fort Montgomery, a fort at Mobile Bay, where Thomas and his company were on standby to resist any British attempts on the city. After moving to Camp Mandeville, which was also near Mobile, on February 12th of 1815, the British captured the nearby Fort Bowyer. The next day, news arrived of a peace treaty from the past December, and the British left immediately. The war was over, and it was time for Thomas and his men to return to Tennessee. He was discharged in May of 1815. In 1816, Thomas married Mary Staggs, and they eventually had a few children together. The next year, Thomas bought 80 acres off the military line, which is now Duplex Road, and Grassy Branch off the Williamson County side of Spring Hill. Thomas passed away on June 4th of 1860 and is buried at the Wells Family Cemetery in what is now the Somerset Springs development off Port Royal Road in Spring Hill. Civil War. 4th Sergeant Joseph Washington Alexander, who went by Joe, was born on March 20th of 1844 in Henry County, Tennessee. After moving in with his uncle in Spring Hill to attend school, the Civil War broke out, and Joe enlisted into the Nathaniel Chairs Company, which later became part of the 3rd Tennessee Infantry. He and the company went up to Kentucky before the regiment was transferred to Fort Donelson to defend against General Ulysses S. Grant's offenses against the Cumberland and Tennessee River defenses. Joe participated in the Battle of Fort Donelson on February 15, 1862, and helped push back the Union Army, but surrendered with the fort the next day. Joe was now a prisoner of war. He was sent to Camp Douglas prison camp in Chicago, Illinois. That means he had to walk the entire 444 miles from there with many other prisoners. I feel for him because the only one time I've ever been to the Chicago area, the car ride was bad enough. Though being imprisoned for 7 months, Joe was exchanged in September of 1862 and promoted to 4th Sergeant. In spring of 1863, he participated in the fighting from Port Hudson, Louisiana, to Jackson, Mississippi, until July 13th of that year when Joe was shot in through the right lung, shattering his shoulder blade upon exit by a sharpshooter in a tree about a half a mile away. Dr. James Turner Sanford Thompson, a surgeon of the 3rd Tennessee Infantry, helped Joe recover from his terrible wound. Luckily, by October of 1864, when he was put on permanent duty at Selma, Alabama. There, he was captured and paroled in 1865 when Union forces captured the town. In 1871, Joe married Martha Delia Crump, and they eventually had 7 children together. After trying to run his second store in the area, Joe became postmaster of Spring Hill and turned his store in Carter's Creek into a post office. He was also a charter member of the Beechcroft School for Girls and the Spring Hill Male College. Joe passed away on January the 15th of 1902 in Spring Hill and is buried at the Spring Hill Cemetery on Macklemore Avenue. The Spanish-American War. Walter Pitts Parham was born on April the 30th of 1967, likely in the Kedron community of Spring Hill, where he would spend most of his life. After the United States declared war on Spain in 1898, Walter enlisted into the 1st Tennessee Infantry, Company B, and he and his infantry were sent to San Francisco, California for training, which they were still in progress of when Spain surrendered. Though the war was technically over, Walter's service was definitely not over yet. In October of 1898, the infantry's men were all ordered with what was supposed to be the simple task of overseeing the Spanish withdrawal from the Philippines. By February of 1899, the Filipinos had become upset with the United States because they were not going to let them govern themselves. Walter and the rest of the army camped outside of Manila, where the 1st Tennessee Infantry was stationed until the first shots were fired at the Battle of Manila. Full-blown combat had erupted, and Walter was set to the front line with his infantry to support the Utah artillery, and they began pushing the Filipinos back. After the Battle of Manila was over, all the men from Walter's infantry were loaded into boats and sent to invade Iloilo Island. They were the first troops ashore after the Navy bombarded Iloilo City. Walter participated in the heavy engagement with the Filipinos at Jaro River, and after Iloilo Island was cleared, he and the infantry were sent to Cebu Island to subdue insurgent activity there. By the time October of 1899 had came along, the infantry was discharged after a huge welcome ceremony in Nashville. In 1913, after returning to the Kedron community, Walter married Ina Cleveland Harmon, and they eventually had 2 daughters together. Walter was an assistant during the hog cholera outbreak in 1914 in Murray County and was a chairman of the War Bonds Committee during World War I. Walter passed away on December 12th of 1922 and is buried at the Spring Hill Cemetery on Macklemore Avenue. World War I. Private Homer Hill Parks was born on July 15th of 1893 in the Kedron community. As Homer got older, it became obvious that there was something different about him. He was unusually tall. By the age of 20, Homer had already surpassed his father in height. He was 6'7.5" tall in his bare feet and 6'9" with his shoes on. After attending Branham and Hughes Military Academy, a military school that was on the property of Ferguson Hall on Main Street, the United States entered World War I. Homer attempted twice to volunteer for the Army, but was turned down both times for unknown reasons. Later, he received a draft notice and was inducted into the Army in Columbia on June 28th of 1918. He was sent to Camp Gordon, a camp in Georgia, for basic training. But, of course, there was one problem. There was no clothes big enough for Homer since he was so tall. Homer was given pants that came up just below his knees and was told to wrap the rest of his bare legs with leggings. On August 18th of 1918, about 2 months after basic training, he set sail to Europe. From this point forward, Homer's service record gets a bit sketchy, after he later stated that he was assigned to the 42nd Infantry Division, 169th Regiment, and was wounded in a gas attack at St. Mihiel. But the 169th Regiment was not part of the 42nd Infantry Division. Plus, his service record that was filed with the state has no mention of him joining the 42nd Infantry Division. However, his service record does not account for where he was assigned immediately after reaching Europe, so it is uncertain what regiment he was actually assigned to within the 42nd Infantry Division. Homer's service record is incomplete, but his ship records for his return home state he was a victim of a chlorine gas attack, which goes along with the story he told. Entering the trenches was one of the most concerning parts of the war for Homer. He soon realized his height was a safety concern. He said that what they called trenches felt more like gullies to him, and when the bullets were flying, he felt like he was standing on a tree stump. After being gassed, Homer stayed for several weeks at a hospital and was assigned to the 77th Infantry Division, 305th Regiment, Company E. After being released, the 77th Infantry Division is the same infantry that the famous Lost Infantry came from. After the armistice was signed on November 11th, 1918, the Argonne Players Group was put together by the Army. The Argonne Players were a group that traveled around and entertained troops waiting to go home. And since Homer was the tallest man in the American Army, he was added to the show. He would walk out on stage, tell him that he was the tallest soldier of the war, crack a small handful of Army jokes, and walk off stage. Homer was a player for the Army basketball team, and since he was so tall, he played center. Because of his height, he got chosen for many things, like to be color bearer at parades, especially at Christmas Day, on Christmas Day of 1918, when he was one of the color bearers in review for President Woodrow Wilson. It was very important to note that Homer was the tallest man to serve overseas, not the tallest man in the military overall during World War I. There was no record of the United States trying to find who the overall tallest soldier was. In 1919, an article in the Arkansas Gazette reported that both President Woodrow Wilson and General John Pershing stated Homer as being the tallest man in the entire American Expeditionary Force. Homer was sent back to the United States on March 23rd of 1919 and discharged on April 30th of 1919. During his military service, he became friends with Tennessee World War I hero Alvin York. Homer attended York's wedding in 1919 and even his dedication ceremony for the Medal of Honor. Almost immediately after his discharge, Homer began working with circuses like the Keith Vaudeville Entertainment Act, Ringling Brothers, Palisades Amusement Park in New Jersey, and the Hagenbach Wallace Circus. He was even a guard at the 1933 Chicago's World's Fair's Midget Village. On June 8th of 1920, Homer married Lelia H. Moore. After they divorced in 1922, on December 29th of 1925, he married Ruth Rawls. They eventually had 3 children together. Homer was a guard for the United States Corps of Engineers, a farmer, and an active member of the American Legion Post 5 out of Nashville. Homer passed away on March 6th of 1966 in Nashville and is buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville. Private Marvin Hensley Wright was born in October 24th of 1895 in Lincoln County, Tennessee. Marvin enlisted into the Marine Corps on August 5th of 1917 and went through basic training at Parris Island, South Carolina. Before being assigned to the 47th Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Infantry Regiment, he set sail to France on March 13th of 1918. While overseas, the 5th Infantry Regiment, along with the 6th Infantry Regiment, were assigned to the Army's 2nd Infantry Division. In France, one of the first places Marvin and the Marines were sent was a town called Verdun, a town where there had been combined 700,000 French and German casualties in 1916. Marvin was present on June 6 of 1918, the day 1,087 Marines were either killed or wounded at Belleau Wood. That day, he and his company charged across an open wheat field under fire where they would establish a foothold in Belleau Wood. After fighting for 3 weeks, the Allied command finally received a report saying that Belleau Wood was now United States Marine Corps entirely. In July of 1918, Marvin and the Marines were pulled off the front at Chateau Thierry and was made the national headlines for helping stop the Germans in the Belleau Wood. After the campaign, out of all of Marvin's company men, there was only 36 living out of 250. 214 of the company's men were either killed or at the hospital for wounds. During the St. Mihiel offensive, Marvin and the Marines played an active role. On September 13th of 1918, Marvin was in a deep trench when a large shell exploded behind him, making his ear bleed, and he had to depend on his right ear to hear for many years to come. For that, Marvin earned his Purple Heart. For the rest of the war, Marvin spent his time in hospitals, until when the armistice was signed he became part of the occupational forces. He set sail back to the United States in July of 1919 and was discharged on August 13th of 1919. Marvin married Kate Caldwell on August 23rd, 1923, and eventually had 2 children with her. After Kate passed away in 1933, on June 6th of 1935, Marvin married Betty Sue Brown. They had 1 son together. Marvin always wanted to be a teacher, so after going to school, he taught at several schools: Minders High School, Viola High School, Cedar High School, and finally Spring Hill High School. Marvin served Spring Hill High School in many ways for 27 years until retiring at the age of 70. After that, he became city judge for Spring Hill, and at one point was also city recorder. Marvin was active in various organizations during his lifetime, like the Murray County Teachers Association, Murray County Retired Teachers Organization, the Spring Hill Civic Club, and the Spring Hill Senior Citizens Association, along with the American Legion. Marvin passed away on April 24th of 1987 in Nashville and is buried at Williamson Memorial Gardens here in Franklin. In 2006, Spring Hill opened Marvin H. Wright Elementary School in his honor. Private Elijah Haynes Ayers Jr., who went by Haynes, was born on April 21st of 1913 in Spring Hill. While his name was technically Elijah Haynes Ayers III, when his grandfather, Elijah Haynes Ayers Sr., passed away, his father, Jr., began being called Sr. That is when Haynes decided that he wanted to be, instead of the third, go by Jr. That's confusing, right? Haynes attended school at Branham and Hughes Military Academy, and in 1932 he moved to California and became sports director for Page Military Academy for a year. He took a few classes at Santa Monica Community College, but then decided to move back to Tennessee and enroll at Vanderbilt University, where he graduated from in 1936. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941, Haynes tried to enlist into the Navy, but was turned down because of his eyesight. He was, though, in April 1942, able to enlist into the Army Air Corps. He soon after headed to Texas for training to be a navigator on a B-17. Haynes finished training in September and spent the next few months stationed at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and Presque Isle Air Force Base. He was ordered in January of 1943 to deploy to Europe, and so he boarded the USS Dorchester at Staten Island, New York, on January 22nd. The ship had a total of 904 personnel on board and headed for St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. From there, they headed towards Greenland. A little over a week later, on February 2nd, 1943, one of the ship's escort ships detected a German submarine that was unable to locate its exact position. Haynes and the people aboard the USS Dorchester were told to sleep with their life jackets on, but most did not since it was too warm and it would have been very uncomfortable to do so. At 12:55 a.m. the next morning of February 3rd, German U-boat 223 fired torpedoes at the ship, one striking the boiler room, cutting off power to the ship immediately and making it impossible for the ship to radio for help. The boilers lost steam, and the ship only got out 6 blasts from its foghorn. The scene on the ship was a panic, and people started jumping off the ship into the ocean, dying of hypothermia immediately. A total of 674 men died from the sinking of the USS Dorchester, and the Ayers family soon received a notice that Haynes was missing in action, and they later declared him dead. They assumed he was near where the torpedo struck and was killed immediately. After the war, a man named Charles Cox showed up at the bank that Haynes' father worked at and asked to see Mr. Ayers. Charles told Haynes that his father that he had been on the USS Dorchester with Haynes and that he could give the family more information about what happened to Haynes if they wanted it. Charles was then invited to the family's home in Columbia, where he told them what happened to Haynes in full. Haynes survived the initial explosion and had been ended up in the ocean. Charles was aboard a raft when he found Haynes and pulled him up aboard too. Sadly, he was already too far gone, but he began leading the men in the raft singing hymns. Haynes then had a hypothermic-induced heart attack and passed away. Haynes was buried at sea, but his parents had a memorial marker placed at the family plot in Mount Hope Cemetery here in Franklin. In 2023, his nephews had another memorial marker placed at Spring Hill Cemetery on Macklemore Avenue, next to the grave of his grandparents. Lieutenant George Stackhouse Scoville was born on October 22, 1920, in Mount Vernon, New York. In 1942, after the United States joined World War II, George joined the Navy. On the day of its commissioning, February 3rd of 1945, at Tampa, Florida, he was assigned to the USS Saugus, a ship that would carry troops, vehicles, and supplies. The ship set sail to Hawaii and arrived there in April of 1945. Between May and the end of the war in August, they made 5 trips between Hawaii and the West Coast. The ship spent the rest of its service bringing troops home from the Pacific Theater, including stops in Japan and the Philippines. George was promoted to lieutenant on December 1st of 1945, and in February of 1946 sailed back to San Diego, California. On May 14th of 1946, he was sent to Camp Elliott for a release from active duty. George married Judith Parham, who went by Jute and was a teacher at Spring Hill High School on June 30th of 1951. They eventually married and had 3 children together. George went on to be vice mayor of Spring Hill from 1954 to 59, helped establish the first fire department in town, and served as a volunteer fireman. George passed away on February the 12th, 2011, and is also buried at the Spring Hill Cemetery on Macklemore Avenue. Private Alvy Lee Fowler was born on November the 28th of 1926 in Marshall County. In the early 1930s, Alvy and his family moved to Raleigh Hill. He enlisted into the Army on June 29th of 1949, and after completing basic training, he was assigned to the 2nd Infantry Division, 9th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Battalion, at Fort Lewis, Washington State. On July 9th of 1950, Alvy and the 2nd Infantry Division were ordered to prepare for movement overseas, and about a week later, they set sail to Korea. Soon after arriving, Alvy was sent to the front line during the First Battle of Naktong Bulge on August 8th of 1950. After the 9th Infantry Regiment, the only available troops of the 2nd Infantry Division, reinforced the American troops holding the offensive line there, Alvy saw combat for the first time as they were ordered to counterattack against the North Koreans and recapture Cloverleaf Hill. Cloverleaf Hill was shaped like a 4-leaf clover and overlooked the major highway, and since the North Koreans could use heights to shell roads, they captured the hill. Alvy and his battalion were able to capture part of Cloverleaf Hill, but they were unable to control the majority of it. The next day, August 9th of 1950, Alvy was shot in the shoulder and evacuated to a hospital in Japan. Though the wound was slight and did not cause any major issues, he was still awarded a Purple Heart. Alvy made sure to write a letter to his parents and let them know that he was okay, except for the hole that was left in his shoulder. Because the wound was so slight, Alvy was released from the hospital 2 weeks later and returned to his regiment in Korea. While he was at the hospital, the American Army recaptured the ground that they had lost in the Naktong Bulge attack. Alvy's 2nd Infantry Division was holding a stationary position near the Naktong River when he returned from the front line. Just a few weeks later, on September 6th of 1950, while his unit was holding a defensive on the hills near Hazinchan, near Singuri, the North Korean troops started shelling the lines of the 9th Infantry Regiment. The next morning, a North Korean platoon was spotted advancing towards Alvy's Company E. A firefight soon started, and the North Koreans reinforced the attack. The Americans had pushed back towards the hill. The fight lasted until that evening, but the American lines were held back towards the hill. Sadly, sometime during the fight, Alvey became the first soldier of 11 from Murray County to be killed in the Korean War. Not long after his death, Mamie Parks of Spring Hill received a message from the Army saying that Alvey had been killed, and since Miss Parks lived about a mile and a half away from his family, she delivered the message to them herself. Alvey was temporarily buried in Korea when he was killed, but the next year, his family requested his remains to be brought back to the United States. He is now buried at Harvey Cemetery off Kedron Road in Spring Hill. Twins Private Donald Jerry Dark and Sergeant Ronald Terry Dark were born on June 29th of 1948 at the Walter Pyle Clinic here in Franklin. Though I don't have a ton of information about either of their services, I do want to talk about what I know. Donald and Ronald were together for the entire span of their services in the Army during the Vietnam War. To me, that is astounding because of the entire veterans book, that's the only time I have found that to happen. Two brothers serving together from enlistment to discharge. After completing basic training in July 26 of 1968 at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, in September, the brothers took a supply clerk course at Fort Polk, Louisiana in December. They became part of the 70th Medical Depot at the Ryukyu Islands. For the services to their country on May 13th of 1970, Donald and Ronald both received a certificate of appreciation. They were discharged almost 4 years later on March 1st of 1974. Donald married Doris Mills on June 24th of 1967, and they eventually had 2 children together. His brother Ronald married Judy Goodwin on October 17th, 1968, and they eventually had 3 children together. Talking about the twins doing a lot of stuff together, in the 1980s, they served on the board of mayor and aldermen together. So not only did they serve together in the Army, they served together in an elected position. Donald passed away on February 13th, 2017, and Ronald followed him 6 years later on March 5th, 2023. They are both buried in Spring Hill at the Spring Hill Memorial Park on Main Street. Sergeant Philip Anthony Bennett, who went by Phil, was born on November 22nd, 1947 in Murray County. Right before graduating from Haylong High School in Mount Pleasant, his best friend and future brother-in-law, William Hendley Edwards, asked him, "What are you going to do after school?" Phil responded, "I don't have the slightest idea." William said, "I'm going to join the Air Force because I have a brother who's in the Air Force and loves it." Phil said back to him, "Fine, well then I'm going with you." So they enlisted into the Air Force on the buddy plan on June 14th of 1965. Since he was only 17 at the time, his parents had to sign for him. During his service, Phil was a radio operator with a security clearance. Though I do not know much more about the details of his service, I do know that he would have been honored to be talked about here today. Phil married Diane Edwards on December 17th of 1966, and they eventually had 2 children together. Phil was a charter member of the Spring Hill Library's Board of Trustees, a member of the Spring Hill Historic Commission, a member of the Spring Hill Lions Club, and was an alderman for Spring Hill at one point. From around the 2000s to right before his passing, he worked at Spring Hill Memorial Funeral Home in Spring Hill. Phil passed away on July 24th of 2024 at Williamson Medical Center here in Franklin. He is buried in Spring Hill at Spring Hill Memorial Park on Main Street. If any of you knew him, you would have known that he was a very active talker, and if he was here today, he'd probably still be going on about his amazing stories. Those stories will definitely be missed. Before I finish this presentation, I want to read my favorite story that was submitted. This is the story that was submitted for Corporal Reuben Chairs Billington's part of the book. He said he made roads for the company. The weather was freezing, and he put his pork and beans on the bulldozer to warm up. It's the stories like that I'm glad to be able to preserve. I also need to make note that I'm currently working on a 2nd edition of the Veterans book. If you are or know of any Spring Hill veterans that weren't included in my book, please let me know. I would love to include them. I hope you all enjoyed this presentation. If you are interested in learning more about Spring Hill's history, please feel free to take one of the forms that are on that table to join the Spring Hill Historical and Genealogical Society, which I am president of. Does anybody have any questions for me? I'm looking at you, Dana.
What was your favorite, well, besides the beans on the bulldozer, what was your favorite discovery?
That all depends. If it's talking about veterans, I'd have to think a little bit harder. But my favorite discovery out of working on this book was probably how many veterans there were. Because I didn't realize that what I was getting into when I first said yes to you guys. When you guys told me to take charge of this project,
I also didn't expect how you brought the community together, people have to talk to each other.
the binder that's right there on that table is all of the flyers that I collected from the library. If anybody wants to take a look at the binder afterwards, that's perfectly fine. I hope to be able to get to add more at some point for the second edition. Does anybody have any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment to make. Mr. Wright is her grandfather and my father.
Wow.
And as my father-in-law, I got to hear a lot of things that he normally wouldn't tell people, that he would tell just family that was hanging around that day. And my husband was the only child at the time, and her mother was his half-sister after the first wife died. But anyway, my husband could be a little spoiled, but anyway, he had told Mr. Wright, my father-in-law, that he was not going to do something. And my father-in-law replied with, "Until you have taken socks off dead men, don't ever say that you won't do something." Because they would take socks off the dead men, and if they were dry socks, they would wear them because their feet stayed so wet all the time. That always just kind of stuck with me, to imagine that that was one of the things that they had to do, was to take socks off dead men.
It's the stories like that I enjoy getting to hear and getting to put together for this book. Because once those people are gone, you're never going to hear those stories again unless somebody like me goes through collecting those stories and printing them in a book for the future generations. So thank you for sharing that story with me, because that's pretty interesting. Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
What are other books that you have in the works, other topics?
A book that I am working on now is a book about Spring Hill's mayors, from the founding of the city to modern day. The other book that has already came out that I have worked on and helped the library with is Spring Hill, A Pictorial History. And if you want to buy a copy of that book, it is on that table over there. Oh, everybody has a story. Thank you for reminding me. We're also working on reprinting Spring Hill, Everybody Has a Story, which is basically a book of compiled stories from Spring Hill residents that have lived here most of their lives or for a long time. We're not only trying to reprint the first edition of the book, we're trying to add stories to the book that was printed about 20 years ago. But that book's in the works, so we haven't really started the process of gathering stories yet. But if anybody would like to write a story for the book about Spring Hill, please reach out to either me or Dana, and we can collect your story for the book. Does anybody else have any other questions?
A comment. So the service member you highlighted about the Dorchester, one of the most famous things about the Dorchester is about the 4 chaplains that gave their life jackets away and subsequently drowned. So that's a huge story around that ship. And I just thought I'd throw that out to mention that as a caveat, by the way, but anyway.
Yeah, I think I've heard something about that. I did some research.
It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and since I'm a retired chaplain, but we're still a chaplain, but it's getting more and more popular with history, you know.
Yeah. Well, does anybody else have any other questions?
What does that pin mean that's on your shirt?
I knew you were going to ask. After I donated all the books to the library and the Historic Commission teamed up to create the Heart for History Award in Spring Hill. I was the first recipient of the award, and that's how I got this pin, which the mayor gave me and called it the key to the city. The next year, I was able to present the award to Naomi B. Derryberry, my friend, and we named the award after her in her honor. Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming to this presentation, and if you guys think of any other questions, please feel free to contact me and let me know. Thank you.